So these are the three forms of input that we consider at the moment, so keyboard, mouse, and touch. We tend to pigeonhole devices like this, but it's not really a sustainable model. There are so many in-betweens and outliers. Cameron Moll calls these pigeonholes device silos. And they just don't hold up anymore. We've got mobile phones with resolutions larger than some desktop screens, touch-enabled laptops, and tablets the size of tables. These just don't fit into our model. But that's okay, because once we break away from the silo mentality, we realise just how many different types of devices there are. And that's why I like talking about console browsers. They force us to consider a whole range of inputs that are just starting to creep in, things like gesture and voice. By thinking about D-pads and keyboard input, we make our sites more accessible. We think about how a site might work on not just a very small screen, but simultaneously a very large screen. Web TV is getting more popular too, and TV consoles are a great place to start learning about this context. Basically, console browsers are a really good way to make sure your sites work on lots and lots of different situations. Although my talk is about game console browsers, they're really a metaphor for all the unusual devices out there with screens. And there are just so many that most of us don't even consider, like cameras. There are loads that have browsers now. Most run various versions of Android, and also tablets built for kids. This InnoTab appears to have a bespoke browser that's easy for children to use. And you can even find browsers on printers now. Basically, anywhere that you can stick a screen, eventually there will be a browser. So you're probably wondering how many people actually use the browsers on their consoles. Please don't dismiss these browsers just because you don't use them and can't imagine why someone else would. We've made that mistake before with mobile phone browsers. This is a screenshot of someone on Twitter called ScridgeryD, and this is their game stats on the Wii U browser. So they've spent 87 days playing on the browser. But you probably want to see some actual stats. So Ofcom, they do a lot of research into media habits in the UK and internationally. And they found out in the UK that 18% of people used a game console to access social networking sites. TV game consoles are used for lots of things, not just for gaming. So the newer models let people play DVDs, watch catch-up TV on BBC iPlayer, watch video clips on YouTube, and even watch live TV. So think about the context of using your phone as opposed to your TV. The TV is often a communal environment. Groups of people sit around and watch it. That's why video is so popular on these devices. It's a shared experience, and you'll see later on how some of these devices take advantage of that. People who use console browsers are likely to be quite young, so 20% of 16 to 24-year-olds in the UK visit websites on a console. In the households that own a PC, a console may be a convenient extra way to browse the internet if there's competition for the other devices. Ofcom also reported that low-income households are more likely to have a console than a computer. So this may be the only way that some people can get online. But don't dismiss consoles as being just for kids. Ownership is quite high amongst adults as well. Interestingly, amongst adults overall, men are slightly more likely to own a TV game console, but women are slightly more likely to own a portable console. People expect to do the same things on a console as they've been doing for years on desktops. And consider our attitude to phones several years ago. We were surprised to learn that people wanted to do some really complex stuff on such a small device. So let's not fall into the same trap with console users. As we've just seen, console browsers are really popular with young people and for tasks such as watching video. So if you're working on a site like this, it's really important to spend some time testing it in a few consoles. And if you're not, you should still try it out, because navigating your site on one of these devices will be a big eye-opener and help find out where to make usability improvements that benefit everyone. And in the next 30 minutes, I'll show you how. When you see these devices, think about this quote by Jason Grigsby. We too readily base our opinions of how popular devices are going to be to use based on that one time we tried them. But like with phones, the browsers on these devices have been improving over time. Game consoles have been around for decades. So in 1989, the Nintendo Game Boy came out, and that was the first major handheld console, and that didn't have a browser. A few years later, the Sega Activator, which was a controller, you kind of stand in the middle of it, and it experimented with gesture. That didn't actually work very well. Then the Nintendo Virtual Boy, and also, I don't know if you know, that Apple came out with a console called the Bandai Pippin. That also wasn't very successful. In 1997, a portable device came out called the Game.com, and it was the first console to have a web browser. A couple of years later, the Sega Dreamcast came out, and that had a built-in modem, and you could get the browser on a disk. And then the PlayStation 2 came out, which had internet capabilities, but also needed a disk. When I get hold of a console, I run them all through the HTML5 and CSS3 tests to help me compare the level of standards that they support. And I sometimes do other tests too, like acid tests. This is the PSP 1000, and it couldn't run any of the tests. It has really poor CSS support. So this is a BBC weather site, and as you can see, most of the sprites are broken. Most sites look pretty terrible in it, but the device is 10 years old. It's also not touchscreen. You control a little cursor on the screen with that little stick in the bottom left. When did you last see a keyboard like this? Remember, again, that this isn't a touchscreen, so you actually have to use this with the D-pad on the left. Actually, this style of keyboard is in some newer devices. So this is the Sony Smartwatch 2. It has a browser. Audit Saunders wrote a blog post about it, and I really recommend you read it because it talks about what it's like to use this browser. The weight of our websites is getting bigger and bigger, and the consequence of all this extra stuff is that, as well as being slower to download, sometimes sites don't work at all on console browsers. This is because the amount of memory that consoles have available is very limited. I got this error message frequently on the 3DS XL, and that only came out a couple of years ago. It's not just consoles that have this problem. I've seen this error message on web TVs as well. Performance is a really big part of the user experience. I'd argue it's the most important part, because if someone can't even load your website, they're never going to get a chance to judge what it's actually like to use. This is the Nintendo DS. It has an Opera browser. CSS support is very low. A lot of sites would only display a linearized layout. And there's also, which I find quite interesting, an option in the toolbar to disable all images on the site. It comes with a browser cartridge in order to use the browser, and it also comes with this memory expansion pack, because the 4 megabytes of onboard memory just isn't high enough to run a browser. It was built to play games, not to browse websites. This is actually improving as consoles get better, but remember that they're not updated as often as phones and computers. This is a Wii. It also runs an Opera 8 browser. Navigating with the Wiimote is really challenging. It's kind of like a laser pointer, and you have to point to a link with the Wiimote and click. Which is really fiddly, especially when the links are tiny and close together. The plus and minus buttons, they zoom in and out, and the remote also vibrates when you're hovering over a link. This is mildly annoying most of the time, but if you've got a keyboard open and you're trying to click on each character, it just won't stop vibrating, and it's really infuriating. So when you're designing forms, think about what it's going to be like for someone who's using this. The Wii has an 800 pixel wide browser, and the height varies depending on the screen. Moving the cursor to the edge of the screen and pressing the trigger scrolls the page. One nice feature it has is that you can switch the layout to single column mode by pressing 2, and it basically forces a page to lose layout styles, and this can make the site easier to use. Sites load a lot slower on console browsers than desktop. So this advice is from Google's documentation about designing for TVs. Sites will load slower on TVs and consoles than on desktop machines, so it's really important to focus on optimization here. And that's why it's good to test on real devices. You'll get a feel for the speed of the site and how sluggish it feels to actually use. To help make their sites faster, ClearLeft have introduced something they called a design budget. This forces them to consider performance with every design decision. Website optimization often feels a bit like a lost art, but it's still relevant today, even with high-speed broadband. This is a PS3. It's a WebKit-based NetFront browser. Some consoles take advantage of all the buttons on the controller. That's a PS4 one, actually. So this is the PS3's controller. It takes a while to learn all the buttons, but it makes browsing a lot faster. And the thumbsticks move the cursor and scroll the page. L1 on the upper left is a back button, and R1 on the upper right is forward. Pressing the triangle brings up a menu for actions like search and bookmark, and the D-pad moves the cursor to focus between links on the page. The browser width is restricted, so it's a lot narrower than the width of the TV. And either side of the main window are other tabs, which you can switch between by pressing L2 and R2. In 2005, the Xbox came out, but it only got a browser relatively recently. Most of the buttons on the controller are used, and you can use an analog stick to pan, and there's something called Smart Zoom, and that lets you zoom in wherever the cursor is. The Xbox's browser has 2 user agent strings. The second one is when it's pretending to be a mobile phone. You can check this box in the browser settings to make the console pretend it's mobile. And if the sites have a mobile version, they display like this. I think they've added this option because mobile interfaces are generally easier to use on a TV than traditional desktop interfaces. And what this tells me is that we need to turn our attention to making websites just as easy to use on any device as we would for a mobile phone. But remember that making one experience easier for some people might actually make it harder for others. So this is a keyboard on the Xbox, which is better but still very slow using the analog stick. And they space the letters far apart to reduce mistakes, which is really great for touch or gesture. But with an analog stick, it takes a long time to traverse from one letter to the next. And for some reason, they don't let you use a D-pad. You can also change a setting that forces websites to entirely fill the screen. And this often cuts off content on the sides, but I guess it's useful for watching videos. Something that you need to consider if you're thinking about TV interfaces is you need to make sure you have a margin on each edge, and this is because of overscan, and that's when the content goes over the edges of the TV. So Google recommend a 5% margin on each edge. My first thought when designing for TV consoles was, hey, the TV's really big, so I can fit all of these columns onto it. But that doesn't take into account how far away you actually sit from the TV. A large screen doesn't always mean better definition, so text will look a bit pixelated and the colours will be optimised for watching video rather than reading. Between 2007 and 2012, there was a big lull in TV consoles, but plenty of portable ones came out with browsers in the PSP and DS range. So this is the DSi, and I've got it right here. You're welcome to pass it around. So this is how pages look on the device when they've been optimized for small screens. Only the bottom screen is touch, and it's resistive like the screen on the back of an airplane seat, rather than capacitive like a smartphone. There's no multi-touch, so no pinch to zoom on this device, and there are no font styles such as bold or italic. And text size is limited to a range, I guess, to aid readability. The pages actually start loading on the bottom screen. In this screenshot, I've just started scrolling, so it's pushed up to the bottom screen, and that's so that you can click anywhere on the page. The older models like this DSi, they don't support fancy CSS like rounded corners or drop shadows, and anything with opacity makes it really sluggish. So plan from the very start how what you're designing is going to work on different devices. Not just layout, but whether the color scheme is high contrast enough for low resolution screens, and whether any fallback fonts you've chosen will be readable. The DS devices come with a stylus, and they have these two screens. And on most sites, you get two different views. One is a zoomed out view, and the other is a zoomed in view. And you can switch these views around so that you can either use a screen at the top as a zoomed in one or the bottom. And the orange rectangle, that shows exactly where you're zoomed in. Since it's an Opera browser, it supports some really nice features like a date picker on relevant form fields. This is the PS Vita. I've got that right here, and I'll pass it around this way. The back of the device, it has a touchpad. And I really like this feature because you can't actually use it in the browser, but it's used for games to prevent your thumbs getting in the way of the screen. It's like an extra button. And the buttons on this device, they're rarely used for the browser, and it relies heavily on the touchscreen, which seems like a bit of a waste to me. You know, they've got all these buttons that you could use, but they're not actually using them. Handheld consoles have wide screens rather than tall ones like a mobile phone in portrait mode. This device's screen is 960 pixels wide, and this means that many responsive websites show a big screen version of the site, even though a small screen design might be more appropriate. I noticed that the PS Vita has this strange user agent string. I spent a long time trying to find out what Silk was. It turns out it's the browser for the Kindle Fire. User agent string sniffing is not a sustainable method of serving up your website for different contexts. Instead, I recommend that you embrace the fact that people are using a huge range of devices, and they're going to be using those devices to interact with your site. So think about ways that you can make that work for as many people as possible. I love this quote from Jeremy, he's sitting right there, because it pretty much sums up the message that I'm trying to give when I talk about console browsers. When you add features that only work with modern browsers or for people with JavaScript, they should have fallbacks so that some of the less capable browsers, like consoles, can still allow the user to perform certain tasks. Designing separate experiences for different browsers just isn't sustainable. New ones come out every day, and new ones come out on different devices every day, and it's impossible to keep up. Instead, build a solid foundation for your site using progressive enhancement. If you do any sort of detection, it should be for that browser's capabilities, not about trying to find out what the browser is. User agent string is rarely helpful because it's so often inaccurate, and devices are constantly using each other's strings or pretending they're a device that they're not. Here the website thinks that the Nintendo DS is a phone. Even fuzzy device detection isn't reliable. So the PS Vita declares itself to be mobile, a mobile device, and a Kindle Fire tablet, while the two DS devices state they're neither mobile nor mobile phones nor tablets, but computers. They're weird outliers, but they're still important devices to consider. Device detection doesn't consider future devices. It pigeonholes, and that's the same with user agent string sniffing. Having something tell you it's a game console, is that really going to help? Because as you've seen, consoles all work in different ways. Some are touch, some gesture, and let's say you're going to detect that someone has a Kinect and give them a different experience based on that. You're making an assumption that they'd rather use that than the D-pad. The terms that we currently use to describe technology are ambiguous. We've used the term mobile for years to mean a smartphone. But if we're talking about portability, we could include a lot of devices. Like this one, this is the Game Stick. It runs Android, it costs $79, and it's referred to by the company that made it as a portable device, which is kind of curious because it doesn't have its own screen. But you can play games anywhere that has one with an HDMI port that the stick plugs into, which I think is a really nice idea. This is the 3DS. I've got that right here. I'm not going to pass it around because I'm in the middle of an Animal Crossing game. This device has a stylus and 3 cameras, 2 on the back for taking 3D pictures and video, and 1 camera on the front. Special glasses aren't needed to view things in 3D, but the device does have to be held at just the right angle and distance. The depth of the effect can also be adjusted using a physical slider on the side of the device. Only the top screen is 3D, and it's wider than the bottom one, which is a 2D resistive touchscreen. You can use the bumpers at the back to go backwards and forwards in the browser history, and the D-pad changes the focus between elements on the page. And, of course, you can use the resistive touchscreen at the bottom. There are zoom icons on the touchscreen, and the X and Y buttons also zoom in and out. So when you zoom in on text, the text automatically wraps to fill the screen, so you don't have to scroll horizontally to read long lines of text. I think it's a really nice feature. On the XL version, gaps appear either side of the site, like you can see here, because of the difference between the 2 screen sizes. You might be getting really excited about the fact that it's a 3D device. I certainly was when I saw it. But unfortunately, the 3D capabilities aren't enabled for the browser. You can view 3D images on the web, but not within the actual page. You have to physically download the image first to see it in 3D. And the image format is .mpo, and this is a combination of 2 JPEGs that are stacked on top of each other, and the fallback is a JPEG. And this is the Wii U. This is my favorite console browser. I'm just going to pass this around now. Be very careful of that. That's my baby. This console has a lot of browser controls, and I counted 4 different ways to zoom. Zooming is really important on a TV console because most websites haven't been designed for TVs, and the text is very small when you're sitting far away from the screen. So that's why they've got so many ways to zoom. It has a wealth of detectors, including 9-axis control. There's also a camera on the front, and a headphone port and speakers with audio coming through both the TV and the gamepad, giving a kind of surround sound feel. The Wii U's gamepad, it has a nice big screen and a stylus, and you can use your fingers, but you have to press quite hard, and it's still a very different experience to using a tablet. Notice that the resolution on the gamepad is low compared to a tablet, which is the same with all Nintendo's devices. They do this to keep the cost down. Nintendo's browser team have the advantage of higher specs to play with as well in this console. So they now have 1 GB of memory allocated to games and 1 GB allocated to the system, which makes it easier for them to support the latest web standards. It scores 100% in the ACID 3 test, and it even supports SVG. Consoles aren't just for games now. They're being marketed as complete entertainment solutions. So in Nintendo's case, internet connectivity and browser functionality have gone from being a nice-to-have feature to a major selling point. They even see it as a challenge to design an experience that's better than browsing on a desktop. And this is a really interesting interview with the team behind the browser, and it's well worth having a read of the whole thing. Only one gamepad can be used to control the browser, but if there are other Wiimotes connected like this, they can be used as pointers. That doesn't let the user do anything except point. They each get a little hand icon with a number on it. But it's really interesting that multiple people can be interacting with a site at once, and that's not something I've seen before in any other browser. In most situations, the Wii U mirrors everything that you're looking at on the gamepad with the TV. Remember that TV web browsing is often a group activity, and Nintendo have thought about this, and they've added features to encourage that activity, like if you're watching a video, you click on this button to continue browsing while the video continues to stream on the TV, so now it's not mirrored. And this turns the Wii U into a presentation device. The Wii U also supports HTML5 video, and you can have up to 6 tabs open at once, and you can hide what's on the gamepad from the TV by pressing a button that draws the curtains. Then when you're ready, you press a button to open them. When the user with a gamepad is typing, the keyboard is hidden from the TV screen, and there's just a bit of text at the top indicating that someone is typing. You can scroll by tilting the gamepad and pressing the back triggers, which is useful for scrolling on really long pages. Normally, scrolling is quite sluggish on consoles, but it's really smooth on the Wii U. If you're playing a game and you switch to the browser, it pauses the game in the background and asks if you want to start a search with the game's name in it. This is great for if you're stuck and looking for walkthroughs. The gamepad can also be used as a simple TV remote with basic functions such as bringing up the program guide, adjusting the volume, and changing the channel. The simplified interface is actually much easier to use than my proper remote. Navigating user console's D-pad demonstrates why focus styles are so important. So the Wii U adds its own default focus styles, which is a kind of blue outline. But sites like an Event Apart, they highlight the text that's focused, making it even clearer. And GovUK do this as well. This is the Ouya. It was funded on Kickstarter. It's an Android-based console. It's not doing so well at the moment, but there's a new version rumoured to come out this year. And this is the Xbox One. This is also marketed as a complete entertainment solution, and the browser it runs is IE10. There's nothing really that exceptional about the controller itself. It works in a very similar way to the Xbox 360. Also, while testing the Xbox One browser, it was reporting it supported a feature in HTML5, which it didn't. So it's really important to test with real devices. One thing that you can do, though, is use the Kinect's voice and gesture to browse. So the Kinect came, when it was first sold, it came bundled with a console with this Kinect. And it's a lot less of a novelty than the previous version was. The voice support is better, and I found that I use it through choice a lot more than I thought I would, although for some reason it has kind of a hard time understanding me. I think it's my accent or something. It also does facial recognition and says hello and signs me in when I start it up, which is both really cool and really creepy. They also have something called Smart Glass. This is an app for Android, Windows Phone, and iOS that lets you use a phone to control the Xbox. And they have apps for both the 360 and the Xbox One. It's actually a really pleasant experience with the browser, and it's a lot easier to type URLs into your phone than it is on the controller. A feature I really like in the Xbox One is the snap mode. So you can have 2 screens open at once, and one of them can be the browser. So you can really easily switch between the screens to make one the main one. So you can be watching TV on the main screen and displaying tweets related to the show that you're watching in the sidebar. Or you could be playing a game while displaying a walkthrough. I like that Microsoft acknowledged that someone's attention isn't necessarily fully on the game that they're playing or the TV that they're watching. And they're making it easier for people to multitask and trying to make it easier to do some of the things that people would normally do on their phones while sitting on the couch watching TV. it's not just sites like Twitter and game walkthrough sites that need to think about how they make their site easier for this audience to use in this context. Suppose that someone is displaying their Twitter feed in the sidebar and they click on a link that someone's tweeted and land on your site. This is advice from Google's documentation about designing for TVs. So they say that sites will load slower on TVs and consoles than on desktop machines. So it's really important to focus on optimization here. And this is why it's good to test on real devices so that you get a sense for speed and how sluggish a site feels to use. Vimeo have something called couch mode, which is a button that you press up here. And that changes the interface, making it more suitable for a really big screen. And I like this because it gives you the option not just to TV users, but also to people who want this on smaller screens. Back when the iPad mini came out, some people were concerned because there was no way to detect that the device is an iPad mini, so they couldn't specifically target it. But in Matt's words, making something better for some people might make it better for way more people than that. It's a much more sustainable approach to design. We can't keep making bespoke interfaces and adding new breakpoints every time Apple come up with a new device, nor should we. The device landscape is way bigger than that. Microsoft, it feels like they get it. They know how to design for multiple inputs because they built the Xbox. They don't need a completely different UI for each device. It works with any form of input. And that's where I think we should be focusing. I think we need to strive to design our sites for as many possible contexts using the same interface as possible. And that might sound very challenging, but that's kind of the nature of the web. Josh Clark suggests that we assume every screen that our website serves is a touchscreen, which is great advice now that we're seeing laptops and desktop computers come out with touchscreens. So this is the PS4. I've got the controller here, if you want to pass it around. You'll notice it has this touchpad on the front. That's a capacitive touchpad like a phone. And there's also a button on the controller that lets you share what you're playing on the web. The touchpad, unfortunately, doesn't work in the browser, which I think is kind of ridiculous. Like the Kinect, the PS4 has something called the Eye that detects voice and gesture. So gesture is something that all three major consoles now support. And I think we're going to see more of it in other devices. Something that you might want to implement on your forms is the X-WebKit speech attribute, which enables support for speech recognition on fields. The fallback is just a normal text field. At the moment, this only works on Google Chrome, but there's a bug filed for it to be implemented in WebKit. If you want to start playing with gesture, this is the Leap Motion, which allows any computer to have a gesture interface. It does feel like a bit of a novelty at the moment, but I'm sure we'll be seeing more technology like this. I've heard rumours that the new Windows laptops will have gesture support. Microsoft, they are really good at making documentation for their Kinect, which I recommend you all read because it's got some great general tips about voice and gesture. They come up with insights like children tend to make wilder gesture than adults. And looking to the future, Steam are coming out with the Steambox in 2015. It's kind of a range of machines that run the Steam OS, bringing games to people who used to only be able to play them on their computers. It now brings them to the TV. So I'd be surprised if that didn't have a browser. A lot of companies are also working on web TVs or boxes that plug into the screen, like the Chromecast or this Amazon Fire TV, which has a console-style controller. A lot of the problems that smart TV users face are exactly the same ones as console users. So using a TV remote to browse is incredibly fiddly. Some come with trackpads like this one, but the experience is still not great because most sites have been designed for mouse users. This is the Visio box, which I tested, and although it has a trackpad and full keyboard on the back, it's incredibly difficult to use. I found it far more difficult to use than a console. Even though we have high-end cutting-edge technology available, that also creates a market at the lower end for affordable, low-spec devices, and we're starting to see a lot of these. I think we put too much emphasis on supporting technology that most regular people don't have yet, like retina quality screens, and not enough on supporting the less capable technology, because that will still be around for a very long time. It is important to plan ahead and think about how we're going to support retina screens, but maybe we should worry about that after testing our designs on cheap, low-quality, poor contrast screens. It might not be very sexy, but your users will thank you for it. And also, it feels like we've only just got to grips with mobile and tablets, but this is just a fraction of the web, and we need to start exploring more of the other devices out there, because it's only going to get weirder. Console browsers live in an uncomfortable area between mobile and tablet, desktop and TV. They often act like mobile and desktop browsers, but the way that we interact with them is so different. It's not about testing your website on every device there is. It's about understanding that diversity and reacting accordingly. So thinking about the whole spectrum of ways that people will interact with your site and planning how to make that experience better. So I think that's all I've got time for, but if you're interested in learning more about console browsers, this is a link to a site where I put all my research up there. And I'll be putting a link to these slides up there too. Thanks very much for listening.